Oh no, I'm low on salts. Okay then. Like a regular Barracuda, but only more acidic. What's up everybody? Today I want to talk about BioShock Infinite, first released in 2013 for the PC, Xbox 360, and PS3. Similar to the first two games, this is a role-playing FPS with a completely new setting. In the first 15 minutes, we are introduced to the flying city of Columbia with all new sci-fi concepts. You might wonder, with Infinite breaking the mold, does it lose the same appeal as the first two games?
It's just a little airborne. It's still good.
Yeah, pretty much. For the drastic changes and risks Infinite takes, I must say the game is really good. Mind you, there is a lot to take in. The gist of the game is we are a private detective named Booker DeWitt who has been sent to Columbia to retrieve a girl to wipe away his gambling debt. The girl we have been sent to politely kidnap is named Elizabeth. One of the best features of BioShock Infinite is the dynamic that is developed between Elizabeth and Booker over their journey. The attention to detail and character development and how they interact with each other is easily a best for the BioShock series. As we progress, Elizabeth becomes increasingly helpful as she'll supply us with items when we are in trouble. It really removes the tediousness of her being an escort mission similar to Ellie in The Last of Us. It also helps that Elizabeth and Booker are very well written. Keep in mind, the tones don't always jive, as there could be a really emotional scene and I might be like, hey Elizabeth, come unlock this door, and she'll switch to a normal upbeat tone, which was really weird.
Because he is not going to have long to use it.
You want to take a look at this?
That won't take but a minute.
Next to character development, the level of effort put into Columbia was noticeably consistent. The Town Center, Order of the Ravens, Monument Island, Battleship Bay, Soldiers Field, Finkton, and Emporia look astounding. You really feel like you're in the 1910s, with exception to the mechanical horses, giant bionic men, and commercially available superpowers. Now with slightly suggestive packaging. Wait, is that a tentacle? Anywho, one of the biggest reasons the environments look so damn good is the lighting. IIrational games really outdid themselves with the lighting effects to give the world a more realistic feel. Well, for the most part. When traveling in the police station, the shadows of Elizabeth didn't have a consistent angle in the same room. That really rustled my jimmies. Now, it's pretty surprising, BioShock Infinite includes themes on religion and racism. Both really stand out in the first quarter of the game, but they're both cut short pretty quickly. The city's religion is based on the founding fathers of the US, which is neat, but doesn't really get fleshed out. As for racism, it's first brought up when we see an interracial couple that is almost stoned at a public celebration. The scene illustrates how the Society of Columbia promotes racial supremacy. This serves as the foundation of the game's central conflict, with the subjugated rising up as a rebel organization called the Vox Populi. Beyond the attempted stoning, I thought the game played it pretty safe when it came to the racial themes. I think from an artistic perspective, it's disappointing the game didn't try and go as hard as Django Unchained. But on that same note, they could have really messed up the game's message. You know, I get it. I think the risk of negative press could have really killed BioShock as a series. Rumor has it there's a fourth game in development, but IIrational Games doesn't exist anymore, so odds are it's just not going to be the same. The gameplay of Infinite is fast and sharp. It's the best the series has ever seen. The game's also pretty fair for difficulty. For duration, the game is between 7 to 11 hours, with the DLC adding on another 4 to 6 hours. One thing I despise is the devs replaced the medkit stockpiling mechanic with a shield. Once the shield is broken, it'll regenerate if we avoid damage. I wonder what series they took that from. Sure, it's one thing to copy Halo with a shield mechanic, but why do you only get to carry 2 guns this time around? It makes me think they were trying to inject realism. When people think of BioShock, realism is not the first thing that comes to mind. BioShock is a series about cities under the sea, ghosts, robots, superpowers, and chambers that'll resurrect the dead on the drop of a dime. Also, why is it when I jump off a ledge to kill myself, I just magically reappear where I jumped? Sure, it's fun to kill myself over and over, but why couldn't I carry all my weapons? Make up your mind, Infinite. One aspect I really like from a gameplay perspective is that Elizabeth has special powers that make portals to parallel universes that can assist us during combat. We can pull through cover, robots, supplies, and decoys. This looks nothing like me. The portal mechanic also injects some very cool plot premises, but we'll come back to that later. Let's talk about the weapons of BioShock Infinite. It's nice to see that dual wielding from BioShock 2 is held over. I wish the game had a bit more variety when it came to weapons, but they all have a great sense of polish. One of the first weapons we receive is the Skyhook, which is mainly a melee weapon, but it can also be used to traverse the skylines of Columbia. The first firearm we receive is the broadsider pistol, which is a great starting weapon. We also get 2 versions of a submachine gun. The first is the RRR machine gun, which has a high rate of fire. The second version is called the Repeater, which trades the rate of fire for damage. It's pretty noticeable when you look at the rate of oofs per minute. After that, there's two versions of the shotgun in-game. The first is a lever-action shotgun called the China Brim shotgun. The Vox version is called the Heater, which trades ammo capacity for increased damage.
This is my boomstick!
We then have two versions of a carbine. The first is the Huntsman carbine, which fires a single round at high damage. The Vox version of this weapon is the burst gun, which fires 3-round bursts. Not a fan of the burst gun, the damage is just too low. After that, we have two grenade launchers. There's the Pig Flak volley gun and the Vox version, which is the Hailfire. For some reason, there's only one version of a sniper rifle, which is called the Bird's Eye sniper rifle. Same goes for the powerful Paddywhacker hand cannon. Lastly, we have the Barnstormer RPG and Peppermill crank gun, which are super fun to use. The crank gun being held with one hand as Booker rides the skyline looks hilarious when you consider how heavy this thing looks. I kinda wish they had Vox versions for the 4 last weapons I mentioned. On that same note, I don't understand why similar weapons don't use the same ammunition. Both versions of the weapons appear to originate in Colombia. Why not just simplify things and let us use the same ammo for both versions of a weapon? As this is a BioShock game, we have weapon upgrades, and boy, there are a lot this time. It's nice that they gave a vendor specifically to upgrade our weapons rather than having the special one-time use machine we're used to, but certain upgrades only become available as you progress. Now I could list every upgrade, but this video would be way too long if I do. I can say every upgrade you purchase is useful. Two honorable mentions though, the Hailfire upgrade allows for a high damage mag dump, and the sniper rifle rate of fire is ludicrous. Who needs aiming? Now, for plasmids, they have been replaced by something called vigors. Similarly, Eve is now referred to as salts. Other than that, the concept hasn't changed one bit. The first vigor we receive is possession, and allows us to take over machines. Once upgraded, we can possess people and decrease the cost of salts per use. The second vigor is Devil's Kiss, which lobs a fire grenade at enemies. The upgraded version allows cluster bombs and increased damage.
That's a lot of damage!
The third vigor is called Murder of Crows, which will stun groups of enemies. Upgrades include increased stun duration and crows that will inhabit corpses as a sort of trap. The fourth is Bucking Bronco, which forces our enemies to levitate. When upgraded, enemies will hover longer and stay still. The next is Shock Jockey, which is similar to Electro Bolt. When upgraded, it can be chained to surrounding enemies and has a longer stun duration. After that we have Charge, which allows us to lunge our enemies, and when upgraded gives brief invincibility as well as an explosive effect. Undertow knocks enemies back or can pull them towards us. The upgrades give higher range and allow us to pull in multiple enemies. And lastly we have Return to Sender, which deploys a temporary shield and absorbs damage which can be hurled back at our foes. Upgrades include ammo absorption and reduced salts per use. One last thing I have to mention is that gene tonics have been replaced with gear this time, which grant stat modifiers. The game offers a lot of customization around gunplay, vigors, skyline use, and melee. I think the game should be commended, they did a really good job on the level of customization. Let's talk about the enemies of BioShock Infinite. The enemies this time around are nothing like the original 2 games, where we have no splicers or big daddies, which is a nice change of pace. First off, we have the police with the pinnacle of artificial intelligence. After that, we have soldiers.
Ooh, that is gonna hurt tomorrow.
Then we have snipers, which are very rare in game for some reason. Next we have heavy soldiers, which are actually not that heavy. One enemy that's totally awesome is the fireman. I love the effects used for their fire attacks. Right before they perish, they always charge at us and erupt. Then there's Zealots of the Lady, which can turn invisible and attack us using a sword. Another one I thought was cool was the Beasts. They use rocket launchers and heavy armor. For robots, there's the traditional turrets, which come in rocket and machine gun variants. They also added a new model called the Mosquito, which is basically an airborne turret. One enemy that's kind of a robot is the Handyman, which are bionic behemoths, which are pretty messed up. They are surgically transformed terminally ill patients turned into servants, and all they feel is pain. Another really cool enemy is the Motorized Patriots. They come in 2 versions. There's the Columbia version, and then there's the Vox Populi version. Nothing like murdering a giant Abraham Lincoln. Lastly, we have the Boys of Silence, which when alerted will send zombie-like enemies after us. And they're also really good at jump scares.
Should be able to head downstairs and get to Elizabeth now.
Hello there.
Now, there are no big daddies, but this is offset by the Songbird. He is the protector of Elizabeth, which in a way makes him the original Big Daddy. I love that his eyes change color to mimic the Big Daddies we know. I just wish the sounds he made didn't make my ears bleed. Okay, that's about it for the enemies. Let's talk about the plot without spoilers. BioShock Infinite's plot is fascinating, and it really takes some solid twists and turns. It truly takes the series in a new direction, and it's more than just a floating city with internal conflicts. I will mention that one day I hope we get a BioShock with branching paths and unique storylines that give each player a unique playthrough. It's hard to explain why the word infinite is in the game's title without spoilers, so let's jump into spoiler territory. Please skip to the timestamp above to avoid spoilers. The game opens, and the year is 1912. A man named Booker DeWitt arrives at a lighthouse off the coast of Maine via a rowboat by two unknown persons. As we progress, we learn that Booker was given specific instructions from a mysterious group. We are told, bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. Booker then enters the top of the lighthouse, which houses a rocket that transports him to the city of Columbia. We determine we are in a church after landing. As Booker walks around, we are introduced to the likeness of the city's leader, Zachary Comstock. We also see paintings of his deceased wife, Annabelle Watson, but we'll refer to her as Lady Comstock. Comstock is the leader of Columbia, and a prophet who predicted, "The seed of the prophet shall sit the throne, and drown in flame the mountains of man." You know the drill, we'll come back to that in a bit. Before Booker can leave the church, he gets baptized. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get around the priest. Now the game hints that Booker's previous sins are rather severe, and the priest thinks he needs a bit more baptizing, which nearly drowns him.
Where's the money, Lebowski?
Booker then makes his way through Columbia towards his target on Monument Island. Shortly after the church, we randomly receive a telegram from someone named Lutece, which tells Booker not to draw number 77 at the lottery, whatever that means. We go a little bit further, and we meet two twins where we have to toss a coin, and the outcome is heads. This is our first of many visits from the Lutece twins, which are massively important to the plot of Infinite. They are the two in the boat at the beginning. As we go to part ways, Robert, the male twin, turns and we see the coin toss has been conducted over 100 times. This is an important hint of the grander scope of Infinite. Anyways, we eventually come to a poster that shows a hand with the letters AD marked on it. This mark signifies the false shepherd who will steal the prophet's child and ultimately lead to the destruction of Columbia. Unfortunately for Booker, this makes him public enemy number 1. We go a little bit further and enter a public event, and we are required to draw a number. Oh shit. Oh well, it can't be that bad. Oh god. Just before we're able to assault the presenter with the baseball, an officer sees the AD mark on Booker's hand and stops him. After a rousing bout of fisticuffs, we start battling Columbia's law enforcement as Booker makes his way toward Monument Island.
There's one thing that never fails. Nice glass of warm milk, a little nap, and a total frontal lobotomy.
Just before we arrive at the island, we have a run-in with Comstock where he says he knows Booker. Booker, of course, denies it all and tells Comstock they've never met. They finally meet face to face, and Comstock uses one of his devout followers to try and burn Booker alive. Booker manages to escape and arrives at Monument Island. Now, I have to mention this as it did bother me quite a bit. When you almost get killed by the worshipper, you're getting pretty close to the giant statue of Elizabeth. It looks big, which makes sense, as you know, physics is a thing. When we load into the next area, the statue appears to be smaller and further away. Seriously, Infinite, stop rustling my jimmies. Once we enter the facility on Monument Island, we discover a large device called the Siphon, designed to impede Elizabeth's powers and prevent her escape. We also discover research which was carried out on Elizabeth since she was an infant. Eventually, we come face to face with her after falling through a roof. The introduction of Booker to Elizabeth is masterfully executed with the sequence of Booker granting her freedom, the realization she was being watched, the introduction of her protector Songbird, Songbird's destruction of the giant Elizabeth statue, and finally, their descent into Battleship Bay. Booker later awakes to have Elizabeth run off to explore. We find her dancing and socializing for the first time ever. In order to sway Elizabeth to leave the city, Booker lies about taking her to Paris on the First Lady airship. The two set off, and again we run into the Lutece twins. We get to pick one of two chokers for Elizabeth, one with a cage and one with a falling bird. Both are depressing. We progress a bit further, and a woman calls out to Elizabeth, calling her Anna, but is mistaken. Moments later, we are ambushed by a disguised group of Columbia's finest. Depending on whether we draw first, we will see Booker with a bandage on his hand for the rest of the game. The game then dabbles in the morality of Booker killing people, and Elizabeth seems to get down with it almost immediately. We go a bit further, and our path is blocked by a broken down machine which requires the Vigor's shock jockey. The two then head to the Hall of Heroes, where we start to see the extent of Elizabeth's powers. Upon entering the hall, we run into the forces of Cornelius Slate, who is an old associate of Booker's who recently rebelled against Comstock after accusing him of being a liar about his involvement in the Boxer Rebellion and the Battle of Wounded Knee. Both Slate and Booker were present at the battles and agree that Comstock did not participate. As we move through the exhibits, we learn that Elizabeth is Comstock's daughter. This aligns with the seed of the prophet shall sit the throne part of the prophecy. Comstock had planned to groom Elizabeth to be the next ruler of Columbia. We then track down Slate and obtain the shock jockey Vigor. We have another choice to either kill or spare Slate. The decision either results in Booker shooting Slate in the head or sparing him only to be found later on lobotomized. This is a great way of making us feel like our choices don't matter. All choices in-game result in minor outcomes, which is frustrating. Infinite gives the illusion of choice, but in reality the game is extremely linear, and it really takes away from the depth of the experience. Anyway, we make our way onto the First Lady airship. As the two depart, Booker directs the ship to New York with the intention of delivering Elizabeth to his clients. Elizabeth reads the coordinates and realizes Booker lied about Paris, and rightfully so, knocks his ass out.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. What?
Booker later awakes to find the airship under the control of Daisy Fitzroy, the leader of the Vox Populi. Daisy offers to return the airship if Booker can supply a large amount of weapons for her cause from a gunsmith in Finkton. I should mention, Finkton is the industrial area of Columbia, which produces the technologies we've seen. When we enter Finkton, we see people who have been pushed to the brink to maximize the profits of Fink manufacturing. We also witness a wage auction that ends in an assault just to be awarded work at the lowest wage. I love how Finkton paints a desperate picture of what life would be like without labor laws. Anywho, we make our way to the gunsmith shop, but he's nowhere to be found. We learn from his wife that he's been taken by the police to a nearby club. We fight our way into the hideout only to find the gunsmith has been killed. Suddenly, the Lutece twins appear and tell us of an alternate solution for our corpse. Elizabeth tells us there's a tear she can open, but she isn't certain what will be waiting for them on the other side. We enter the tear to find a world where the gunsmith is still alive, but in this case, they took away his tools. Speaking with the gunsmith's wife, we can see she's now a completely different person. On top of that, the smith's religion has also changed from Buddhism to Columbian. Booker and Elizabeth then agree to track down the smith's tools to complete Daisy's request, which I find perplexing as we know this is a new universe, but we don't even know if Daisy's still alive. Whatever, just roll with it. We make our way to the police station and locate the smith's tools. On the way, Elizabeth mentions she's missing her finger, but doesn't know the root cause. Once the two reach the station, they don't have a way of getting the tools back to the smith. Oh, hey look, another tear. Well, it worked the first time. Well, everything's on fire, and the Vox are now fully rebelling against the Columbian forces. To top it all off, the Booker of this dimension has already died as a martyr for the revolution. When we learn the Booker of this dimension is deceased, the Booker we know has a nosebleed, which we'll come back to in a bit. The goal of escaping Columbia is still intact, so the two make their way to the First Lady airship. On the way, they join the Vox and fight through Fink's factory and destroy a blimp, which was pretty awesome. Daisy then discovers Booker is alive and tells the Vox soldiers to attack both Booker and Elizabeth as they must be imposters. We then find Jeremiah Fink and Daisy as she follows through on her manifest to kill the founders of Columbia. Before Daisy can murder Fink's son, Elizabeth intervenes and stabs Daisy. This scene is impactful, and you feel like Elizabeth went through a severe change. It's also symbolized by Elizabeth cutting her ponytail to give herself a more mature look. The two set off and begin to leave Columbia when Songbird is called by a nearby statue to destroy the First Lady airship.
Everybody do the flop!
We crash and awake to the Lutece twins playing the same song on piano, which, needless to say, freaks out Elizabeth. Thankfully, her concerns are resolved when the twins assure her it is the wrong instrument and has no effect before they vanish. Booker and Elizabeth then make their way to Comstock House to find a way of stopping Songbird. On the way, Booker is forced to promise Elizabeth he will kill her to prevent Comstock from recapturing her if they run out of options. It's kind of awkward with the whole choking thing. Anyway, we try and get into Comstock House to only be denied entry as Elizabeth is not recognized by the lock. The two then decide to go to Lady Comstock's grave and steal her hand. When they enter the burial chamber, a siphon is activated, bringing Lady Comstock back as a ghost. Oh geez, Scoob. So we fight the undead version of Lady Comstock. She can also summon the undead as minions. Sure, okay. I love how we can possess the undead using possession. It's basically a reverse Uno scenario. After defeating Lady Comstock, the Luteces can be found digging their own graves and point us to 3 locations. We progress and we learn the secret past of Columbia, the first being how Elizabeth wasn't actually the biological daughter of Comstock. She was brought into this world via the Lutece Terror Machine. We also find out Comstock had the Lutece twins killed to cover up Elizabeth's origins, but in reality, he accidentally created 2 trans-dimensional beings. We then battle Ghost Lady Comstock one last time. Afterwards, she tells us how Comstock murdered her to hide Elizabeth's origins. She then bashes down the gate to Comstock House. Unfortunately, before the two of them can enter Comstock House, Songbird swoops in and steals Elizabeth. Booker fails to live up to his end of the bargain and allows Elizabeth to be captured. Booker makes his way into Comstock House to try and save Elizabeth, but something seems off. The environment appears cold, and there are terrors which showcase Elizabeth's torture. The further we progress, the more we see her become warped into the person Comstock prophesies to inherit Columbia. The Luteces suddenly appear, and hint we have been pulled into the future, and 2 seconds later, we find Elizabeth, who is now a senior. In the background, we witness Columbia attacking New York City, fulfilling Comstock's prophecy. The Elizabeth of this universe gives Booker a message, and then sends him back to his previous universe where we find the Elizabeth we know being experimented on. Booker then fights his way to the controls and turns off the siphon, which allows Elizabeth to murder the scientists with a massive tornado. Booker and Elizabeth then set out to kill Comstock for his deeds. The two fight their way onto Comstock's flagship. They enter Comstock's quarters where he greets Booker and Elizabeth calmly, similar to Andrew Ryan. Now, in stark contrast to Andy, Comstock loses his composure rather quickly. Comstock declares everything he has done was to keep Elizabeth safe and keep her away from Booker. He states he rained fire on DeWitt and sent mighty armies to stop him. But all he needed to do was to get Booker to explain what he did to Elizabeth's finger. Comstock then grabs Elizabeth's hand and begins to assault her. Booker calmly intervenes, by which I mean he smashes the prophet's head against the birdbath and then promptly drowns him. Strangely enough, Booker's nose begins to bleed, and he reassures Elizabeth that he had no involvement with her severed finger. The two then head to the bridge of the flagship and discover how to control Songbird using a flute as well as the hint from future Elizabeth. With Songbird's help, the two fend off an attack from the Vox. Booker then decides to destroy the siphon on Monument Island to give Elizabeth full access to her powers. They summon Songbird one last time, and he destroys the siphon, which in turn destroys the flute used to control him. A freed Songbird charges at them only to be pulled into a tear by Elizabeth. We appear in front of a window with Songbird drowning. Elizabeth consoles him before he cries out and fades into the abyss. This was gut-wrenching to watch as Songbird was not evil. He simply existed to protect Elizabeth. Oh look, we're in Rapture. The two then make their way to a bathysphere and arrive at the iconic lighthouse on the surface. For myself, this is where things start to go off the rails. No, not like that. We enter the lighthouse to see an infinite number of lighthouses, and an infinite number of Bookers and Elizabeths. Elizabeth starts to explain the universes we see have constants, like a city, a man, even a coin toss. Every iteration is unique in its own way. Despite the infinite possibilities, Elizabeth explains there is only one outcome. We go through the next door and appear at a baptism, which Booker explains was 20 years ago, immediately after the Battle of Wounded Knee. This moment parallels the opening of the game, but at this time, 20 years ago, we find out Booker backed out of the baptism at the last moment. Elizabeth then takes Booker into another dimension, where we learn Robert Lutece hired Booker to hand over the girl, which in reality was his infant daughter, Anna DeWitt. Booker then hands over his daughter to Robert, and he declares his debt is paid. In this moment, Elizabeth tells us Comstock is still alive in other dimensions, and Elizabeth cannot rest until every variant of Comstock is destroyed. Booker, now struck with grief, chases after Robert to get his daughter back. We then witness Comstock receiving Anna from Robert through a tear generated by the Luteces. As the tear closes, it severs the same finger as Elizabeth's. The brutal reality is upon us. Elizabeth is Anna DeWitt. Booker sold his daughter to Comstock through Robert to wipe away his gambling debt. We then learn that Robert brought our Booker to another dimension where he could redeem himself and exact revenge for the twins. The rowboat shown at the beginning was a lie, as Booker was taken to the lighthouse via a tear by the twins. Booker then commits himself to killing Comstock before the man even existed to undo his sins. We enter the final door, and once again, we see Booker being baptized. With infinite possibilities, we need to acknowledge that Booker would have followed through with his baptism 20 years ago. Little did he know he would cease to be Booker DeWitt in these universes. He would rise from the stream named Zachary Comstock. Once this realization hits Booker, he is held below the waters of the stream and is drowned by his biological daughters. And that is the conclusion of BioShock Infinite's base game. Man, talk about being overwhelmed at the end, am I right? Okay, we can't really ramp things down until we talk about the DLC of BioShock Infinite, which really captures the full ending of the game. Let's dive into Burial at Sea. Now, it might sound strange, but the first half you play as Booker living in Rapture before the fall of Andrew Ryan. The Elizabeth we know enters Booker's office and hires him, as in this universe, he is a renowned private detective. Elizabeth demands that he locate a little girl named Sally. Why? We have no idea, and she won't say why. Our first major clue is that a man named Sander Cohen may know her whereabouts. So then we leave Booker's office and start to wander around a functioning Rapture. I have to mention, the DLC have bouncers with a projectile hookshot style drill, which is very cool. We even find out later on they were discontinued to preserve continuity with the original game. Eventually, we come to Sander Cohen's club, the Garden of Muses, and we learn that we have to get these masks that have been sent out to exclusive artists to get into the club. We hunt them down, make our way inside. Oh, cool, a new piece of art. Nice to see things haven't changed. Sander, being the great guy he is, asks Elizabeth and Booker to dance for him, and he'll provide the location of Sally. Oh man, thank God Cohen's not insane. Wait, Cohen then has one of his goons throw us in a bathysphere, which takes us to Fontaine's department store. The store was recently sunk and made into a prison for Fontaine's men. On the way down, Cohen radios us and tells us this is where Sally is located. Oh, and no big deal, Sally is Booker's adopted daughter. Probably would have been good to know that earlier, but the game needs to build a narrative. Booker tells us that his gambling addiction made him lose track of her, and she wound up being reported as murdered, but we all know what really happened to her. She became a little sister. Anyway, from here we battle splicers, find a new plasmid called Old Man Winter, and locate Sally, which leads to us fighting a Big Daddy. After wounding the Big Daddy, Booker's memories come back to him, and he remembers that he was actually Zachary Comstock that tried to steal another Booker's daughter with the Lutessa's help, similar to the original story. However, they mistakenly closed the tear on the infant's neck rather than her finger. A regretful Comstock had the Lutessas move him to Rapture, where his memories morphed into the Booker that previously existed. The Comstock we inhabit pleads to Elizabeth for her forgiveness for the accident, but Elizabeth rejects the apology, telling Comstock, "You will be sorry." Comstock is then gored from behind by the surviving Big Daddy as Elizabeth stares coldly. Later on, Elizabeth awakes to see Sally being taken away by Atlas and his gang. Before they can kill Elizabeth, an imaginary Booker appears and coaches her on avoiding being shot. With fake Booker's advice, Elizabeth claims she can free Atlas from the department store in exchange for Sally. To back up her credentials, Elizabeth lies and claims she was Suchong's assistant. Atlas takes the bait though, and allows her to roam the store of her own accord. Oh look, it's Elizabeth's corpse. Wait, what? Somehow with multiverse magic, Elizabeth remains in a lesser form trapped in Rapture after she was killed by the Big Daddy who also murdered Comstock. The whole point of including this in the plot was because they wanted to show that Elizabeth is trapped and there is no way for her to escape later on. Anyways, fake Booker guides Elizabeth to hunt down Suchong, repair his Lutece machine, return to Columbia, steal a lock of young Elizabeth's hair, learn about our backstory with Songbird, and lastly, steal a Lutece particle to raise the department store back up to Rapture. There are 3 big takeaways from this. The first is that Rapture and Columbia were sharing technology. With Vigors being drinkable and Eve being injectable, they are actually a modified version of the same sea slug extract. The second is that Elizabeth and Songbird's bond was caused by Elizabeth rescuing Songbird at a young age. This creates the idea that the bond the two shared was similar to a mouse pulling a thorn from a lion paw. I have to mention this, it really plays into the whole idea of Elizabeth betraying him when he drowns. The last takeaway is that the Lutessas convinced Daisy to allow Elizabeth to kill her to force her to mature as a character. It kinda cheapens Daisy's death, but it was kinda neat. Anyways, we return to Rapture and raise the department store from the depths and get double-crossed by Atlas.
This is why we can't have nice things, Barry.
Atlas, believing Elizabeth is actually Suchong's assistant, interrogates her to find out where his ace in the hole is located. Elizabeth, unaware of what the ace in the hole actually is, cannot answer, and winds up getting overdosed on truth serum. She wakes up weeks later to see Rapture is in ruins, and the Civil War is in full swing. Atlas, now getting desperate, demands Elizabeth tell him where his ace in the hole is located, or he'll kill Sally. Once again, Elizabeth follows fake Booker's advice and tells him the key is in Suchong's lab. Elizabeth is allowed to go to Suchong's lab and witnesses the same lion paw mechanic between Big Daddies and Little Sisters. Shortly after, we witness Suchong's death by the hands of a Big Daddy, which recreates an audio log from the original game. Yeah, nostalgia. We then find the key to Atlas's ace in the hole. Unfortunately, this is where I really get put off by the plot. Elizabeth, who has shown a high level of intelligence for the entire game, goes willingly to her death. She gives the key to Atlas, gets beaten to a pulp, and when Atlas realizes the key is gibberish, he yells at Elizabeth for the answer. She then tells Atlas the cryptic paper says, "Would you kindly?" Atlas then finishes Elizabeth off with one last strike, and leaves Sally to live. Elizabeth dies knowing Jack will come to the city, as he did in the original game, and save Sally. That's assuming he doesn't harvest her? You know what, let's not go there. As a prequel, Burial at Sea and Infinite work as a great setup for the first BioShock. It just really bothers me that Elizabeth didn't get the happy ending she deserved, but on the other hand, the ending is in line with the realistic themes the characters portray in Infinite. Part of me wants to say that the plot for BioShock Infinite is on par with the original. It's so good you can play it 3 times over and still find it entertaining. So, in summary, the characters, plot, and gameplay were great. BioShock Infinite tries out bold new ideas, and the ending of the base game is amazing. My biggest complaint with Infinite is the 2-weapon system. It's something I despise in modern shooters, and I don't think it benefited this game. The other issue I have is that the first half of the DLC is way too short. Most people complained about this back in 2013, and now that I've seen it, I agree. This was a cash grab. I really enjoyed BioShock Infinite, but it just doesn't quite outdo the original. I'm gonna give it an A. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate you watching until the end of the video. And lastly, but most importantly, I hope you all have a great day.
Ah!